Properties of ionic compounds. An ionic compound is formed as a result of an attraction between particles. Let's look at an example of this. Ionic bonding is the complete transfer of electrons between atoms. It is a type of chemical bond that generates two oppositely charged ions. In ionic bonds, the metal loses electrons to become a positively charged cation, whereas the nonmetal accepts those electrons to become a negatively charged anion. In this example, sodium, the metal, gives up one of its electrons to fluorine, the nonmetal. As a result, sodium becomes positively charged and fluorine negatively charged. A second property is that an ionic compound is made up of metals and nonmetals. Let's look at the periodic table to determine how this happens. The periodic table is divided in two parts by the staircase. On the left of the staircase, you find the metals, and on the right side of the staircase, you find the nonmetals. When a bond is formed between a metal and a nonmetal, an ionic compound is created. The third property of ionic compounds are that they are solids at room temperature. Let's look at an example. This is a molecule of potassium fluoride. It is made up of one atom of potassium and one atom of fluorine. When you group multiple molecules of potassium fluoride together, they form a tightly packed structure called a lattice structure. Because the molecules are so tightly packed together, they hold their shape and are therefore solids at room temperature. A fourth property of ionic compounds are that they are good electroconductors. Let's find out why. Ionic compounds are made of positively and negatively charged ions. These ions can conduct electricity if they are able to move. There are two different ways to allow them to move. The first is if you melt the compound, the ions become molten. This allows for the ions to move farther apart and electricity can flow. The second way is to dissolve the compound in solution. Once the compound is dissolved, the ions spread apart and electricity can flow. The last property is that ionic compounds have a crystal shape. Sodium chloride is an ionic compound. This is an example of an ionic lattice of sodium chloride, which is also known as salt. When you look at salt under a microscope, you can clearly see its crystalline shape. So let's review the properties of ionic compounds. The first is that ionic compounds are formed as a result of an attraction between particles. They are made up of metals and nonmetals, are solids at room temperature, are good conductors of electricity, and lastly, they have a crystal shape.